Senator Mason, members of the Joint Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety, my name is Jeffrey Benedict, and I'm a voter from Winslow, Maine. I stand before you today as a citizen, not being compensated or aided in my testimony by any organization whatsoever. To start, thank you, I would like to ask that my testimony be considered as delivered for each bill, 754 and 750, individually, even though in respect for your time, I will not read the same testimony twice in the same afternoon to the same committee. In a further effort to save your valuable time, I've provided 40 copies so that you'll have a copy for each bill. All right. I am a medical marijuana patient. I have been a medical marijuana patient for several years, and now that I've paid the state my money and they gave me this card, I can admit that I'm a medical marijuana patient. I am not now, nor have I ever been, on unemployment, welfare, food stamps, and the only time that I've ever collected workman's compensation was when I received a single check in 1979 in the amount of $382. It was compensation for lost wages when at the age of 16 I had all five toes on my right foot cut off while working on a ranch in the Colorado mountains. Now I'd like to tell you why I'm a medical marijuana patient. It was over 20 years ago since the first time I went to a doctor to talk about the pain that I was feeling. At the time, the pain wasn't that bad. It was like I'd worked out too hard the day before. You know, it was annoying pain, but I could live with it. But I was really curious why I was in pain. So I went to doctors. I went to lots of doctors. They got me tested for just about everything. And after all the tests and the money, they came back and they said they have no clue why I'm in pain. So it wasn't that big of a deal. I waited 5 years before I ever did anything about it again. Never went and saw a doctor, never took any painkillers. Then 5 years later, the pain got exponentially worse. Now, if I'd been sedentary for more than an hour or so, doing something like maybe sleeping, when I woke up, my muscles were hard like stone. It hurt just to move my arms enough to move the covers off of my body. Standing up is like standing on two very long needles and having those needles shoot through the heel of my foot, through my calf muscle, exploding in my thigh, and then piercing me in the hip. I feel this pain, and I felt the pain then. And as the pain tore through my muscles while I was standing, I would be able to walk it off in an hour or so. Then the rest of the day it was the same as before, as long as I didn't sit still too long. Sitting still for periods of time would cause me to feel the same pain all over again. Sitting on the couch watching an hour-long show on television with my arms crossed would cause every muscle in my body to feel as if it was being ripped from the position in which when it came time to move. I went back to the doctors. I actually went back to the very same doctor. I went to the same doctor I went to the first time. I figured I needed somebody to know that this wasn't a brand new thing. Somebody that would have a record of it. When I went there, they thought I was just angling for painkillers. But when I never asked for painkillers and I left the office, they dug up my old files. 2 days later, they called me back and scheduled a new appointment. After that appointment and many thousands of dollars in tests, they sent me to a neurologist because, again, they still had no idea what was going on. I spent the next 15 years going to doctors, taking tests, and having people stick metal things in my muscles, adding a dose of electricity and calling it a test. All sorts of crazy tests and muscle biopsies, and still nothing conclusive. The pain had gotten to the point that it wouldn't go away. I could no longer walk it off in an hour or two. Every movement I made felt like each and every one of my muscles was being pulled to its limits and beyond, like saltwater taffy on the taffy pulling machine. 15 years after resuming medical attention, 20 years after seeing the first doctor about the muscle pain I'd been feeling, I was feeling at my very worst. So bad, in fact, my doctor told me I needed to get my affairs in order because she didn't think I was going to live long enough to see spring. My muscles were disintegrating from the inside out. The doctors had no idea why. Because it was not Lou Gehrig's disease or some other well-publicized muscle disease, there was no money or interest in trying to resolve the problem. The tests and the medical care would eventually cause my wife and I to file bankruptcy. One morning I could barely stand up. And my wife drove me to the doctor's office. And when she got there, she put me in my wheelchair and wheeled me up to the 5th floor all by herself. When she got to the doctor's office, she told the doctor, she says, "See, this is what I'm talking about." The doctor took one look at me and said, "That's your thyroid." Spent 20 years, one look, she figured it out. It took another 5 years before a doctor discovered that I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or chronic lymphatic thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune disease in which the thyroid gland is gradually destroyed. To put it in layman's terms, my thyroid will one day work 3-4 times more than it should. The next day it will do absolutely nothing, and then it'll go 3 days and run perfectly. And because of that, they were unable to diagnose it, because one day it was great. Everything was fine. Anyway, the years that it took to find the cause and a way to stop the damage caused irreparable harm. The best anyone can tell is that my muscles were dissolving from the inside out, slowly but surely. The only way to prove this theory is to have an autopsy, and I'm not quite ready for that test yet. My muscles will not repair themselves, and today there's no method of repairing them with science. But the damage has stopped getting worse, and I will not get worse as long as I control my thyroid. The pain is constant, and at times it's unbearable. I find solace in the fact that it has stopped getting worse. This was such a hopeless feeling. The pain just got worse and worse, and all the doctors could do is give me stronger and stronger painkillers, not knowing how to stop the damage that was being done. When the pain wouldn't go away, I finally agreed to start taking painkillers. As times went by, we worked our way through all of your typical painkillers. Basically, we tried every single painkiller available at the time. Several years later, we finally worked our way up to morphine. It was during that time I was on morphine that my wife woke me up one night. The house was burning down, and there I was, not 3 feet from the raging, out-of-control fire, sleeping soundly, until she started screaming. After that, I refused to take the morphine. I started taking OxyContin instead, increasing the dose more and more every month. Over time, it became clear that I was going to have to get off the OxyContin so I could concentrate on one thing for more than 15 seconds at a time. It was harder for me to get a doctor to support me coming off of OxyContin than it was to find a doctor to provide me OxyContin. It got to the point that I personally checked myself into the Seton Drug Rehabilitation Center in Waterville because I honestly thought I was going to kill myself. And when I called the doctors, all they would do is offer to prescribe me OxyContin. They would not provide any other solution. I finally did get myself off of OxyContin. I was still in pain, though. I went and found another doctor who specialized in pain management. I explained my situation to him. And after he went through 20 years of my records and asked me, from the first time that you had this checked out to the second time you had this checked out, you waited 5 years. Were you still in pain during that time? I told him that I was, and that it wasn't that bad because I didn't feel it all that much. Then he asked me if I was taking anything for pain back then. I said I wasn't. So he asked me if I was smoking pot then. I said yes, I was. In fact, quite a bit. He then asked me if it ever occurred to me that the reason I didn't hurt so bad back then was because I was taking a painkiller. The fact that I was smoking marijuana was why it didn't hurt that much. You see, when I grew up, I stopped smoking marijuana and doing all the other things that I'd unwittingly been using to take away the pain. I grew up. I stopped taking the very painkiller that was helping me not feel the pain and still allowed me to be a full-functioning adult. My doctor and I then discussed the pros and cons of becoming a medical marijuana patient. I am a medical marijuana patient, and my pain is mostly under control. I still have bad days. And because medical marijuana is expensive and hard to obtain legally, I don't always have any. And when I don't have any, the pain causes me to be mean and hard to deal with. Pain causes me to be someone I don't like to be. The pain causes me to treat my family the way they do not deserve to be treated. Marijuana gives me relief from the pain so that I can treat people the way they deserve to be treated. Pain does strange things to your brain, and after a while, it just makes you mean. Now, I'm not some hippie that just likes to sit around and smoke pot all day. In fact, when I got my medical marijuana card, I went down to the Winslow police station to show them my medical marijuana card and ask them if they had a police officer that can sit down with my child and explain to him how important it is that he treats this like any other prescription in our house. I wanted to make sure my son understood that all of his hopes and dreams could be crushed by taking even the smallest amount of my prescription to school, to destroy his future because some cute girl talked him into it or some bully bullied him into it would be a tragedy. Now, I hope this helps you understand why anyone would be a medical marijuana patient in the first place. Now, as a medical marijuana patient, why do I care about LD 750 and 754? Well, the primary reason would be that the bill increases the amount of marijuana a person may possess under the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act from 2.5 to 5 ounces. If you know anything about marijuana, you may think that's an excessive amount of usable marijuana, so I'd like to take a moment to explain why this would make sense to a patient. To start with, the closest registered caregiver to my house lives approximately 100 miles away from my house. This person has paid a fee of $400 to register as my caregiver. Therefore, I drive 200 miles round trip to fill my prescription. Due to the current moratoriums in dispensaries in central Maine, it does not appear that this is going to change at any time soon. The next point to consider is that the growing processes have advanced to the degree that I actually have one strain of marijuana that I use for nights due to my relatively motionless, hopefully for 2 to 3 hours of sleep at night. I need a much stronger painkiller than I would use during the day because I'm now going hours at a time without moving. And generally, the dose I consume at bedtime is no longer working by 2 or 3 in the morning. The pain wakes me up. I then walk around the house and stretch out my muscles for about an hour and consume more marijuana and then continue my night's sleep. If I were to consume the marijuana I use during the night to help me sleep, I would be one of those people sitting on the couch with a bag of chips watching TV all day. That is far too strong for me to use during the day. That's why I have 2 different strains. So I have to purchase 2 separate strains, and unless I'm going to drive 400 miles a month to keep supplied, I have to buy a 1-month supply all at one time. And buying the 2.5 ounces does not supply me for an entire month. With the current limits the way they are now, I'm not allowed to purchase a quality that will last the entire month. Therefore, I'm forced to go without pain relief for nearly a week out of every month. And due to weather this winter, there was a time I went without relief for 2 weeks. Passing LD 750 and LD 754 would allow me to purchase a 1-month supply of my prescription with 1 transaction.